Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, a show celebrating and questioning one of the most beloved entertainment companies in the world through honest, passionate, and clear-eyed Disney discussions. I'm Jeff DePauli, your entertainment-obsessed host with rose-colored glasses removed. Today on the show, it's all about D23 Expo 2022. This past weekend, Disney fans got together for a weekend of nostalgia, news, joy, and sometimes frustration for the biggest Disney fan event. And this time was a bit extra special, as it's been 3 years since the last D23 Expo due to the pandemic. Now, if you've never been to D23 Expo, it is quite the experience. Immediately following the end of D23 Expo 2022, I sat down with Disney's thinking fan author, Aaron Wallace, to discuss our experiences that weekend. We may have been exhausted, but we had a lot to say. So if you didn't make it to D23 Expo, you can live it vicariously through us right now.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Alrighty, D23 Expo 2022 is wrapped. We are here in the fancy hotel room of Aaron Wallace, author extraordinaire, and we're both delusional from long days, late hours, early mornings, and we're going to talk to you all about our D23 2022 experience. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me back on the show. And yeah, I am three things. I'm delirious. I am sad that Expo is now behind us, but I'm also so excited still about everything that happened over the last 3 days.
Yeah, it's been wild. I do want to preface this all by saying we are seriously in his hotel room. So like if you hear doors banging in the hallway and such, apologies in advance. But I really wanted to record an immediate reaction, which number one, I know Aaron is not into so much. Aaron is very much someone who likes to sit and marinate in his thoughts for a while. So applause to you for taking this leap with me and trusting me enough. Aaron, thank you.
This is a marination-free discussion.
Marination-free. And the other thing is that this is very much going to be about our D23 Expo experience and not really about, I mean, of course, we'll talk about some of the news, but this is not going to be like, here's all the news that came from D23. So don't expect that. I'm sure I'll hit a lot more of that news in the next House of Mouse headlines. So let's just jump into this. And I want to start. Listen, it's very easy to pick apart these sorts of things and have a lot of negative thoughts because it's certainly not perfect the way that things go. But let's just start with some good. What was your favorite thing of the weekend? Because I have one thing that easily sticks out in my mind.
Okay, well, I could answer this two ways, and I'll quickly answer it both ways. First, my favorite thing about the Expo every time, now and for always, will be the interactions with people. So it's just being out on the floor, running into people, meeting new people. That is the reason I'm here above all else. But in terms of actual events or programming, I think we're going to have the same answer, which was the Muppet Christmas Carol 30th anniversary celebration.
Agreed. This was something that, honestly, when I first saw the list of panels and everything, this certainly popped out to me. But it didn't mean it had to be a good panel. But this was done in, they called the premiere stage. So it was like a 3,000 seat space. Not the biggest, but the second biggest, but about half the size of the largest one. And I mean, it was delightful. Brian Henson and Dave Goelz, Gonzo, and the costume designer. And who was the other person on that panel? There was somebody else, wasn't there? I think there was a fourth.
There was.
The Paul
Williams.
Paul Williams, the composer of Muppet Christmas Carol, of course, from Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, and a lot of Muppets, which I can't tell you how exciting it is to see the Muppets live. It never gets old, and I'm lucky to have seen them live many times at this point, but it's still a thrill.
Yeah, and I had never seen Miss Piggy performed live other than, the Magic Kingdom show, but that's a little different because those are like larger than Muppet-sized Muppets, right? But yeah, to see some of these classic characters brought to life, and we saw kind of the mechanics of it exposed, right? The performers were not behind a barrier. They were in front of us, so we got to see all the puppeteering happening.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a delight. I love Muppet Christmas Carol in general. This panel was top to bottom a delight. A beautiful set that they had on stage. Beautiful Muppets. Great interactions. I mean, I don't know if this will be on YouTube or anything. I don't know if they recorded it.
Well, there were people recording for sure. So.
I did tweet the performance portions from my personal Twitter account, but as far as like the conversations, it was phenomenal. Like top level. We can talk more about it later if we want, but I wanted to start with the good so that this whole thing isn't a crap fest. Because let's start before Expo with the reservation system, which I've talked a little bit about with Kyle. And for those who didn't go through this, the quick version is we were basically tasked with ranking our desires of what to see. So this could be panels, this could be giveaways, this could be meet and greets, this could be numerous things that you want to do at Expo. And there was not a lot of instruction with this other than rank this. And so it became I called Kyle and I was like, hey, like, what's the best strategy here? Pick as much as possible, pick as little as possible. And nobody really knew. And it's pretty clear that, at least to me, that was very purposefully done. They did not want us to know that we were going to get one selection for each day if we were lucky.
Yeah, very little instruction. And I mean, you said we were instructed to rank. To me, that wasn't even clear. You know, we were asked to make multiple selections, and I thought the wording was ambiguous as to whether these were ranked preferences or not. But yeah, the whole idea of confusing, ambiguous direction from D23, like that's so on brand for the Expo, to the point that it's to be expected. I do think, I'll say I applaud them for continuing to find ways to make this work. They clearly haven't gotten there yet, but in terms of making the process of getting into the programming you want, it seems like every year there is an attempt made to get better than the failure that preceded it.
Yeah, I agree, but I have a real problem with like the manipulation is the wrong word, but it was deceitful. Like they knew that if they said, hey, it's going to be one panel a day, guess what? 90% of people are choosing Marvel, right? And then that's a huge problem if nobody has other rankings. Here's what I mean really was not good for me was I didn't get any Hall D23, so none of the big panels. I guess I should be grateful that I got 3 panels because there are people who got things like go get a Pixar ball. That was their selection for a day. If I got those for all 3 days, I'd be livid. And then I've heard of people not getting anything. And so like it was really, it was kind of like shady, but like, I don't know. It was a terrible system. This is not the way to go in the future. And if they do want to go this way in the future, they have to explain better what the result is going to be.
Yeah, well, the irony is in the contrast between D23 Expo operations on the one hand and Walt Disney World operations on the other. It's just amazing that the company that's going in the direction of we are going to micromanage and micro-schedule every aspect of your experience months in advance to then go to the D23 Expo and find just, essentially chaos year after year and reservation systems that don't work. Essentially, it's like the technology exists to create a better guest experience, a more dependable, reliable, navigable guest experience than what we ever find at D23 Expo. So I don't know why we aren't there yet. But again, there are attempts at improvement every year.
I do feel like it's less about good guest experience and more about the company benefiting from knowing where everybody is, at least when it comes to like a Walt Disney World situation. Sure. So, there's that. So the reservation system, there were a lot of people leading up to the Expo who were very unhappy with their results. I get that the last system didn't work. It worked out beautifully for me, but there were a lot of people that did not at all with the previous system. So obviously that wasn't great either. I don't know, man, but like waking up at 4 a.m. to go to panels is just, I did it one day. I couldn't have done it all 3 days.
Yeah. And again, in the year 2022, it just shouldn't be the case that there's a need to do that. There are X number of seats in every single room. People sort of know what they want to do. There's a way to accomplish this without people having to show up at 4 a.m. and still not get into the programs that they want and only finding out at the last minute that they're not getting in.
Okay. So here's the situation with that. So For those who have never attended, basically, there are people who have bought expensive tickets that are guaranteed to the big panels. Then there were the people who got the random reservations who are quote unquote guaranteed to the panels. And then there are the standby lines. Standby, you have no guarantee whatsoever. The problem is this. Obviously, the people who bought the more expensive ticket, they're good. The reservation people, there was no clear indication of when they needed to return by. I talked to some cast members. They were like, they need to be here an hour early. Others said 30 minutes early. And then others, and what it ended up being, at least for the first panel with Disney Legends, it was like, no, they could show up till the last minute. Here's the problem. If you're going to do this, this is what they need to do. And this isn't genius, which is why I'm like, whenever I have these thoughts or ideas, I'm like, this is not genius. Like, if I'm thinking it, I cannot believe somebody at the Walt Disney Company hasn't. If you have a reservation, you must be there 1 hour in advance. If you are not there 1 hour in advance, then you are forfeiting your reserved seat. That just needs to be a rule that is actually followed. At which point, they should know by wristband count how many people have the reserved seats. Plus, how many people have those more expensive ticket seats and are there. So then you know how many more bracelets you can give out. Give those out. When they're gone, you're full. That's it.
Yeah, agreed. I do want to give credit where it's due. I noticed that starting on day 2, they started pushing out mobile notifications explaining or clarifying the return times, right? So if you have this kind of reservation or this kind of pass, you must be at your event 30 minutes or 60 minutes out. I'm guessing that was in response to the confusion on day 1. But to your point, I think everything needs to begin earlier. Even the process of admitting guests of all types into a room should begin 30 minutes sooner because they never, ever accomplish getting everyone into the room prior to scheduled start time.
Yeah, I mean, I know the big problem with that for Hall D23, the 7,000 seat space, is a lot of times they are rehearsing.
Yeah.
And they're basically not given permission to load until rehearsal's done. Well, I'm fast forwarding a bit, but fast forward to the last day with the parks panel. They started loading like less than 30 minutes before. By the time the thing started, like maybe half the audience was in there. I was let in 20 minutes into the presentation. Like, sorry, if you're rehearsing late, you need to bump the start time. And I know that screws everything else up based on your reservations and stuff, but it's just nightmarish. Anyway.
And the bumping of start time did happen with one of the major Hall D23 events this year. But yeah, that's happened to me this expo and previous expos where I'm seated 20 minutes into the programming. But you just made an important point that I want to highlight. And this kind of is counter to the point I made before. But they are doing rehearsals for totally unique one-off major productions, sometimes 2-3 times a day in the same room. And I thought about this today while watching the Disney Princess concert in the Hall D23 event on Sunday, the last day of Expo. So this is a concert that actually tours all around the country, going to arenas and different performance venues. So when you think about what they're doing at those other venues, they've got a whole day for sound checks and setup and load in and all of that. And the idea that they pull off the same thing for this concert in a matter of an hour or two in between programs. Realizing that does make me want to kind of ease off on my criticism and give Expo their due for having to deal with some real logistical challenges.
Yes and no. And here's why. The Walt Disney Company is big enough to pay for a day of rehearsals. Same can be said for everybody working the event. They can be paid to come to a day or two of orientation. I don't know what the system is, but it does not feel like there's a real orientation. At least maybe there's like a general one of like, hey, this is how things are going to work. But like people don't know their specific spaces. I can't tell you how many different stories I got from like one cast member next to another one. So that's my frustration is like, I get it. They are pulling off some pretty major things. Obviously, a lot of this is rehearsed off site. But they do not have enough space or time on site to prep these things properly. And like, if you can't do it, then don't do it. Or have a day of rehearsal. You know, I don't know. Maybe they do rehearse there earlier, but it just seems to be this trend of starting late because rehearsal ran late. And it's not okay when you get thousands of people with schedules, waiting around to see if they've been wasting their time since 4:30 in the morning, which we'll get into that later. But yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time sympathizing because the way to fix it is more time. And in most cases, a lot of people are like, well, more time equals more money. I have a really hard time feeling bad for Disney when it comes to spending a bit more money.
Yeah, I was joking that it's a bit like the old toothpaste commercials, 7 out of 10 dentists agree on Colgate. It's like if you want to know where to go, you need to ask 10 cast members or employees. And if 6 or 7 of them agree, then you've got a pretty good sense that, yeah, Hall E is the right place to be.
Yeah.
But that has, again, been a consistent problem from one expo to the next. A very basic example of that is on the second day, I asked a staff member what time the floor closed for the day, which you would think that all staff members would be armed with at least that very basic piece of information. Not only did this person not know, she went and asked like 2 other people and they didn't know. And finally, a guest overheard and came up and said, it closes at 7 p.m. And I was like, thank you very much, ma'am. So the lack of basic orientation and training does seem to be attributable to Disney from an operations standpoint, or to D23, I should say. And I'm not sure why that continues to be a problem year after year.
Because they know how to run theme parks, they think they know how to run conventions. Conventions are a completely different animal, and I can't believe by this point they haven't learned that. So yeah, I mean, logistical nightmares, kind of status quo for D23. Let's talk about some things I did see improvement with, though. Because security checkpoints, I don't know about for you, moved very quickly, like 10-minute lines.
Yeah, getting into the building seemed easier than ever this year. And I'm glad that we're kind of pivoting here because I don't want us to just harp on all of the mainstay logistical nightmares of the expo. There was a lot of improvement. And I think that's my biggest logistical takeaway is that things are getting better. It was not difficult to get into the building on any of the days this year.
And it was still secure security. Like yeah. I don't know if I've mentioned this. I went to San Diego Comic-Con for the first time. Not once did I walk through a security checkpoint. I was shocked. I had to go get like a COVID wristband and stuff, but I never went through a metal detector. I never saw a security person look through a bag or anything, which is shocking for an event of that size. It was good security doing their job thoroughly, but moved the line quickly. They were checking badges everywhere. And that's the one thing, like, I've never experienced the badge experience like D23 has at any other convention, where you have a badge with essentially an RFID inside, I believe. And this is your tap point to get access to the building. So they tap you at security to get a green light. This is great for vendors whenever and granted, like, your information's loaded. So this is essentially to stop you from having to add your email address whenever you sign up for something at a vendor booth. You simply tap your badge and it automatically does all that stuff. It's great. And then you get your free prize or whatever. Also, this is where your reservations were on your badges. And honestly, I was half expecting to have to pull out the email confirmation to prove, yes, I was confirmed for this, even though the badge isn't working properly. That never happened, and I never saw it happen to anybody. The badges did their job, and I think that is a huge plus, a huge Disney plus for D23 Expo.
Yeah, and I will add that, one thing you always hear, a common complaint you hear is that, if you want to get into Expo, you've got to get up at 4 a.m. every morning. And that may be true for some specific events. Jeff, I know you were up that early
today.
One of the days, yeah. But this year I attended just as a regular guest. In the past, I've been there in different capacities, exhibitor, etc., and getting in is a little different in those situations. But this year I was just a regular day guest all 3 days. I don't think I showed up earlier than 7:30, 8 a.m., maybe even later than that, each of the 3 days, and still was able to get in on time. And I didn't get into every event I wanted to, but I got into most of them, and I had a pretty pleasant, stress-free Expo experience overall.
Yeah, another thing that has improved with Expo through the years is there was, at one point, a lot of locking up your phones at Expo, and they did it various different ways through the years, but this year now granted, on a lot of panels they did say do not record, no photos, no video. Nobody listened. But I don't think there were, maybe for Marvel, I wasn't there for that, but none of the panels I went to did they lock up your phone or take it away or anything, because That was a huge nightmare. I don't know if you ever had to deal with that. Did you?
No, I've never gone to the 2 big movie studio presentations, and I think that's mostly where that happens.
I think they used to do it for parks and stuff like that, but even with the movie studio stuff now, I feel like they release the trailer on YouTube the second after they release it in the room for the most part, so they seem to be much more lax. I could be getting a little bit of this wrong. I did not go to the Marvel thing, but regardless, even if it wasn't Marvel and the other studio wanted to, like, we went to the Disney Plus one and they didn't lock up I think you were at that, right?
I was, yeah.
They didn't lock up phones or anything.
And there wasn't even really an ask to put away your phones, except for there was one particular piece of media that was shown where everyone was encouraged to not record. And I thought everyone was very respectful because it was like, hey, just for the next 60 seconds, keep your phones away. But other than that, I think there's been a real evolution in terms of the operators understanding that we live in a social media age and social media can be a healthy thing for the operators. It makes this event seem fun and desirable to the outside world and gets, their information out. So I think there's been a lot less hostility toward phones and posting and filming and all of that.
Yeah. One thing I do miss terribly, I'm sad that this went away, is the gold member preferred lines. I don't know if maybe there's too many D23 gold members now to accommodate that in general public and stuff, but it was a nice added perk. I mean, you do pay over $100 now to be a D23 gold member. So the perk of being like, yes, you're in standby, but at least you're in like gold standby and you'll get preferred, assuming they bring the lines in correctly. I miss that. And when I asked cast members about that, they said, oh, well, your benefit now is that only gold members have the opportunity to buy the $900 pass, which gets you. And I was like, really? Is that equivalent? I don't think so. But that was their answer.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten that those gold member lines were a thing in the past.
Yeah, I was definitely a fan of them and took advantage of them in the past. So I would like to see those come back, but we'll see. The other thing that really, really, really needs to be done, and this frankly was unacceptable to me, this was very much heavily Marvel panel related, was they had signs, they said on their website, they said in emails, 4:30 a.m. is when you are able to line up, 5 a.m. is when we will let you in. Now, for Marvel fans, that first panel on Saturday, people were lining up well before 4:30 a.m. and they got they're the ones who got in. People that showed up 4:30 were turned away. My friend went through this. He came back to the hotel room really pissed, and I don't blame him because it's like, so I followed the rules and I was punished for that. If I were the people running this place and I had people showing up at midnight, 1 a.m, whatever, who refused to go away till 4:30, this is what I would do. I would let them stand in a line. At 4:30, I would start another line, and I would let all those people in, and none of those people from the first line would be let in until everybody else was processed. Because, I'm sorry, like, it's their rule. Enforce the damn rule, because you're punishing people who are listening to you and doing their research. And it's, like, tremendously unacceptable.
Yeah, I think what you just said, I followed the rules and I suffered for it. That is a pretty widely felt sentiment at Expo in a number of contexts. So, for example, there were times where I had a reservation for an event and yet people in standby lines were admitted before me and got to see the whole event in a better seat. And I wasn't in there until 20 minutes later and I was in the back. And things like that shouldn't happen. And I think that was even the case with me and you at one point, Jeff, right? I had a reservation, you were in standby, and you were in way before I was with the better seat.
Totally. Well, this is Disney Legends. Perfect segue. This is the first panel of the event. But yeah, so for Disney Legends, I was in standby. I was there a lot earlier than you because you had a guaranteed seat. But it was so disorganized that it was like, okay, you may or may not get in, typical standby language. But it got to a point where at first, for all of these people with reservations, they were swiping badges. Once it proved you had your reservation, they gave you a wristband for that. Well, an hour before, they were still letting people in. So I said, when are they going to stop reservations? Like, you need to fill this room. You need to know how many reservation people are here. And they're like, 30 minutes before. Okay, we hit 30 minutes. They're still giving out these reservation things. I'm like, what is going on? 15 minutes before, they're still giving out reservation wristbands. I'm like, how on earth do you expect to get any standby in that room if you're still giving out reserved reservations? So I walked up. I said, do you have 2 more wristbands, meaning the reserved wristbands? And this guy like, sure. And he handed them to me, and I cut the whole standby line, which perhaps not the nicest thing to do, but I was not here's the situation with these things. You need to stand up for yourself because, as we just said, following the rules does not work. Now, I didn't do anything wrong in the respect of, I didn't just cut people and keep walking. I went to a cast member. I said, do you have the wristband that I need to get in? And he legit handed them to me. So some people might say I'm wrong. I don't think I am. I think I'm being smart in a really stupid situation.
Well, yeah. And I mean, that kind of thing happens a lot. I do want to say, because I think we can get kind of heated about like all of our bad experiences at Expo.
We're going to talk about the good. We will.
No, but the people working the event are like across the board wonderful, and they're nice and they're friendly and they're polite and they're eager to help. They don't always have the right information, and I don't think it's their fault, but they're acting in good faith. So yes, you do often get the wrong information, or someone hands you a wristband when they shouldn't, or vice versa. But, I don't want to put the blame on these folks.
No, but the other thing I want to say is, so when we got to like that 15-minute point, I noticed they weren't swiping the badges anymore. So I'm like, literally anybody can walk in here and say, I have a reservation, and they're handed a wristband. So I basically did it in a more honest way. I was blatant. I was like, I don't, but do you have any extra wristbands? So, yeah, that was a disaster. And like you said, I got in the room before you, a guy with a legitimate reservation. At which point, did you know how early you were supposed to return? Did you have that information?
I don't recall, but we would have been there. We were, there well in advance, so I don't think it was any issue like that.
Okay. Well, okay. We're going to stop butching for a second. And the other thing that actually I'm not going to stop, because they turned so many people away from that panel, and there were hundreds of empty seats in there. I cannot stand that they don't know how to fill every row to capacity, because later in the expo, I was in one of the smaller spaces and they were like, we're full, go away. And I was like, there's no way it's full. So I walked right up to the door. I said, hey, you got room for one? And the guy goes like, go check. I walk in, I get a seat, and I'm like, there are dozens of empty seats here. So like at least 20 other people could have gotten in here, and you're turning them away. Like, all of these people paid good money to be here, waited patiently, and like, you need to fully, I understand you can't have infinite number of seats, but you should fill every single seat that is in every single space to the best of your capacity.
Yeah, and there was the D20 or the Disney Plus event that at one point closed its standby line to capacity and then later reopened it as the event was in progress because there were so many open seats. But one thing I do want to say, again, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, is, we don't know what we don't know. And Jeff, you certainly have way more insight into like conventions operations than I have ever had. But it's very possible that there are reasons informing some of these things that seem confusing to us from the guest perspective. And there might also be operational imperatives that are informing the judgment calls that are made in the moment. For instance, maybe the guy who's handing you a wristband when he probably shouldn't, maybe he's getting information that says, we just need bodies and seats in the right hand section right now because it's, an optics on camera or whatever. And so something has changed on the fly, and that's why they're making these sort of strange decisions. I mean, that's a hypothetical, but those kinds of things I think I want to kind of make an allowance for and extend some grace for.
Sure. The thing that I don't forgive is having empty seats. You are not allowed to save seats. If somebody's not with you when you enter a room, you can't save a seat. That's, I understand how that can be inconvenient if you're waiting for somebody or whatever. But that should just be a rule. And it's the theme park world, right? Fill every empty seat, move all the way down the row. Like, this is something they do daily in their parks. So just have that mentality, and you will fill every seat if you have a cast member or somebody watching this and making, I can't stand seeing empty seats and knowing people were turned away. That infuriates me. It's just not fair to anybody. And it happened a lot. Anyway, let's talk about Legends, shall we?
Let's do it.
because, well, you missed the opening because you were waiting to get it. But they did a musical medley. So here's the thing about Disney Legends. Honestly, it's not a priority for me. I was happy that you got a reservation. I made it very clear how I feel about the Disney Legend Awards in general, but you love it.
I do.
You love it. So I was happy that you got a reservation. The reason I ended up being like, you know what? I'm not going to wake up at 4 a.m., but if I can go at a reasonable hour and get in, I'm going to go, because I think that they know that like Disney Legend Awards isn't a big enough draw to fill a 7,000 seat room, which begs the question, why not just put it in a smaller room? But they don't. And what they do instead is they kind of mix in the opening ceremonies. Mm-hmm. They said this will be the introduction of Disney 100, the 100th anniversary. So it's like, I want to be there for that. And secondly, I really did want to be there for Don Hahn, who has been a guest on this show many times and was becoming a Disney legend that day. So I was like, if I can get in without the 4 a.m. thing, I'll do it. I got in. Great. So having said that, it's more than the awards. It starts with this big production number with Disney on Broadway performers, and we got some Aladdin, and we got a medley of Can You Feel the Love Tonight and A Whole New World as a mashup. Just note to anybody out there, never do that. Really, and usually they're great at that sort of things. Like, I applaud, literally and figuratively, the productions that they put on at Expo. As you said, these are like one-time things. And they're full-on production numbers like you'd see at an award show and stuff. But Can You Feel the Love in A Whole New World? Not great. Did you see it after at all?
I'm learning about all of this for the first time from you right now.
Okay, not great. And then were you in there by the time Bob Chapek came out and got some uproarious boos?
I was walking in as the boos were happening, which was just like an ecstatic moment to enter the room. And there are many, many reasons I love the Legends ceremony. I have such respect and admiration for the program. I love the politics of like who gets selected and who doesn't and why.
Aaron loves real life drama. He loves drama.
That is not at all true.
Oh, it's
really not true. But
I walked in on booze and I was like, oh yeah.
Chapek drama, I'm here for. But I love that it's the kickoff. Like, as much as I enjoyed the ceremony itself, the kickoff of the expo feels important to be a part of, which is why it was sad that I wasn't seated for that, but that's okay. But then, yeah, I think right now in this moment where the whole world's attention is on Bob Chapek, right? Like, not just the Disney fandom, but the actual like mainstream news media and sort of all of corporate America has its finger on the pulse of what's happening with Bob Chapek and the Disney boardroom at this time. So to be in there in this moment, when Chapek is making his return to a stage where he has been booed in the past when he wasn't even CEO, now entering the stage in the wake of Don't Say Gay, in the wake of the pandemic, the battle with DeSantis, the Reedy Creek Improvement District, et cetera, et cetera. The recent comments by Bob Iger that he, regrets ever putting Chapek in the position to succeed him. To be there in the room, to see how the audience is going to react to him. I mean, that feels like important. That feels high stakes, And so that to me, this was the event to be at.
What did the man behind you yell?
So Chapek walks out to some cheers, I think overwhelmingly boos, and boos are maybe just louder than cheers. I don't know.
For the record, I did not boo. I simply didn't make a noise.
Okay, well,
I did laugh when I heard the boos, but
well, I'll finish the comment. I think we should talk about the whole thing of booing. But so Chapek walks out to the boos. He says, "Welcome to D23 Expo," and a man screams out at the top of his lungs, "You still suck." Which, keep it classy, folks. But I do think, so I've seen a lot of debate on social media, even in my own DMs, people responding to my tweet about this. A lot of debate about the propriety of the booing by the fans for Chapek. And I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I can share mine, but what do you think about it?
I don't have a strong opinion because I waver on this. I recognize that the man's a human being, right? Like, I clearly don't love decisions that he makes. I make no secret of it. I think he's terrible for the Walt Disney Company. And for that reason, boos are necessary, right? It's like you're ruining something I love, quite frankly. But like, there's no separating that. Like, you are literally booing a human being, right? Like, they say the man's name, he walks on stage, he is booed. He's a human, right? Like, I get like it's very easy to paint him as a villain. He does villainous things, I think, but he's still a human. I don't know. Like, to boo a human being, it feels trashy to me. But I don't like people who do it. I'm not like, you shouldn't do that. It's just kind of more like, I wouldn't do that. But like, if it was like, I'd be very likely to boo if he was like, and tomorrow we're closing the carousel of progress. I would boo that stuff from left to right? Like that, he's talking about something he's doing that is horrible, in my opinion. To announce a man's name and then boo him, I think it's trashy, but I get why people want. He's destroying one of my favorite companies in the world.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it as well. I mean, I think clearly screaming out "you suck" is a step too far. Like, I think we should all kind of agree that we don't need to do that. The booing is difficult. What people are booing is not Bob Chapek, the man. They are booing the Chapek administration, so to speak, and its business decisions, right?
But there's no different. First of all, I would question whether that's 100% true. I think some people might be booing that, and I think some people are booing the man. But it's tough.
They don't know the man. I mean, does anyone have a reason to dislike Chapek personally?
Listen, I will always say this. Leading the Walt Disney Company is unfair in the respect that you need to be a good public persona. If he ran any other studio, none of this would matter. He wouldn't need to be likable to the public. This is something that Walt Disney set a precedent for from day one. And through the years, we've had some that have succeeded at this. Michael Eisner was brilliant at it. Some that weren't great and learned it. Bob Iger, I would say, kind of learned it. Bob Chapek, I don't think can ever learn it. I honestly, I see him trying to learn it. And I'm like, dude, it's just not you. Like, it comes across as creepy. Like, there's certain things that you and the person next to you can say and do the exact same thing. And for one of you, it comes out creepy. For the other, it comes out endearing. It's just like a reality of life. And for him, it just doesn't work. When he talks to Mickey Mouse, I'm like, I don't think you're talking to Mickey. I think you're talking to a man in a suit or a woman in a suit. I think it's unfair that is a requirement of the job, but that is a requirement of the job.
Yeah, a weird thing happens within me during the booing. Like, it's almost like he walks out, I want to boo him, but then people boo and you see it in his face, and then I want to hug him. But then, like, even though you see it in his face, his voice doesn't tremble, his hands don't shake, he doesn't really break his stride. And so then, like, in a weird way, I find myself respecting this man whose decisions I generally don't respect.
That's so funny because that does the opposite for me. I'm like, you are such a cold human being that this doesn't even affect you.
No, see.
The reality is I think it does affect him.
But that's the thing. If I thought it didn't affect him, I might feel that way, but I can see it in his face. It cannot be easy to walk out, especially with like friends and family and colleagues and peers in the audience, and to be booed like that, streamed to millions of people. It can't be easy. And so my heart goes out to him. I respect him. But at the same time, the boo is a time honored and proven effective tradition of like discourse of democracy going back to, the early town hall, right? And probably even before that.
Yeah, but we also used to have public hangings. Like I don't think we should do that anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think just because it's always been part of history, it should continue necessarily.
I don't know. I think the argument that an audience should never boo, for instance, the CEO of a multimedia conglomerate, suggests that culture is created unilaterally by corporations and served to consumers, which is not my view. My view is that culture is created by consumer and creator alike in a sort of constant symbiosis, a constant exchange. And there is, however, a differential in power and influence in voice between those two parties. So the creator has a very large microphone, and they have the money, the power. They're controlling the output to a greater degree than does the consumer. So the consumer's relatively limited voice is perhaps best expressed in something like a boo, which in a town hall like this at the Legend Ceremony is one of the very few occasions where the consumers as a collective even have an opportunity to voice that kind of expression of I was to say consumption, but it's really an expression of creation as well, right? Because we're all part of the same process. So I think there is something to be said for it, and the media picks up on the booing. We've seen it become a part of the narrative. When The Hollywood Reporter, when Variety, when New York Times, when the Wall Street Journal comments on the situation happening with Bob Chapek. Every single one of those articles talks about the booing, the unpopularity amongst the fans, and that then informs the pressure that's put on Chapek by the board, by investors, to change decisions that are made. I think we saw that play out with the company's response to Ron DeSantis and the Don't Say Gay thing. So there's clearly a role to be played with the booing. And the last thing I'll say on this is that boos aren't just motivated by fan vitriol over what's happening with a Star Wars character or something like that. There are issues of real, like, personhood and vitality informing some of these boos as well, right? Because they're not just booing what's happening in Magic Kingdom Park. They're booing what's happening with wage and labor policies and practices, with pay rates, with union issues, with human rights issues in the case of Don't Say Gay. And like, these are things that really matter to the livelihoods of individuals. And those are also informing the boos. And so I just think it's a more complicated, nuanced situation than perhaps the gut reaction of, oh, you should never boo someone in a public forum would suggest.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think that's the right word. By the way, folks, if you're hearing some bangs in the background, we're actually very close to Disneyland, and those are the fireworks going off as we record this. So just a little heads up there. But yeah, this is a complicated situation. Like I said, I don't put down anybody that booed him. I do slightly feel bad for the man, but you know what? He can go home to his $70 million mansion or whatever and like cry for a few minutes and get over it, I'm sure. So it's all good. So that was the beginning of the Legends ceremony. And, I don't want to go through all the legends here. I've talked about them in the past, but unfortunately, Don Hahn did not show up. The one man I wanted to see accept his award, who I know was very excited to accept his award, tested positive for COVID that morning and ended up spending the day in the hotel room. So it was really, really, really unfortunate. I do want to say that I felt like Josh Gad gave the best speech. He was hilarious and talking about how he was not hired as a Jungle Cruise skipper and just some kind of digs in general with these speeches. Kristen Bell talking about dressing up as Bob Iger for her birthday or something. Like, really weird stuff happening. With Bob Chapek standing right there, by the way.
Quite a few references to Bob Iger throughout these events.
That got thunderous applause, by the way. Yes. I shouldn't say thunderous. It got applause.
There were so many moments like this where someone would mention back when Bob Iger was CEO and the audience would burst into applause, or like Kristen Bell made the comment, as you mentioned, yeah, I once dressed up for Bob as Bob Iger for my birthday. And then later she said, and Bob Chapek, maybe I'll dress up as you for Halloween, pause, or my birthday. It seemed like there was a little bit of a jabber. The audience was certainly reading it that way. Maybe they wanted to read it that way. There was another reference to the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which also caused the whole room to like flinch and tense up.
What was that one? I don't even remember that.
It was one of the sort of behind the scenes, someone who had passed away and a family member was there to accept on their behalf.
Yes, the person I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but very responsible for purchasing the land that is now Walt Disney World, yes.
Yeah, so again, there was just a lot of kind of tension lurking beneath the surface throughout all of the Legend ceremony.
Yeah, we should mention one change to the ceremony this year. Perhaps, I mean, this is probably not the first time, but in recent years, there was no surprise legend. Usually there's a surprise where somebody else is, inducted that we don't know about in advance.
Yeah, I had a far-fetched prediction that it would be Blackish star Jennifer Lewis, who's done a ton of work for Disney. I had fully convinced myself by the time of ceremony day that this was going to happen. Alas, it did not happen, so I'm rooting for it for next year. But yeah, we had a very large number of inductees, perhaps owing to the 3-year gap between ceremonies. Maybe that's why there wasn't a surprise inductee. There just perhaps wasn't space for one. But lots of good speeches. As you say, Josh Gad's, I think, won the day. Hilarious. And he's just so likable and
I saw him checking out of the Grand Californian. Did I tell you?
You did. Yeah.
I was at the Grand Californian, and I saw someone hugging their plaids, their VIP tour guides. And I was like, who is hugging their plaid? And then I walked over and I hear that voice. And I was like, oh, it's Josh Gad. All right. And his family.
That's great. But yeah, so
and sad. I had my Rick Moranis shirt on. I totally wish he had noticed, and then I would have been like, dude, Shrunk, come on the podcast. Let's talk.
Yeah, because he was involved in the project, right?
Well, it's still going on.
Yeah. But yeah, so sad that Don Hahn wasn't able to be there. I mean, it's sad for Don Hahn, who I've had only fleeting interactions with, but seems like just such a lovely man. And also sad for the fans because I think everyone wanted to have that moment to celebrate him. But I would hope that Disney will do something to make up for it, both with Don Hahn and with Bette Midler, who in a similar situation last year was at the last minute unable to accept her Legends Award.
A few years ago.
A few years ago. And I'd love to see Disney do something, like get them on a YouTube live stream or something, a Zoom call, and let them make some comments to the fans. Have a moment.
Yeah, it's too bad. So that was a bummer. The whole Disney Legends ceremony did end with a really random performance from Encanto. Like, I get that Encanto's popular, but to me, I was like, this is the Walt Disney brand these days. So freaking muddled. I'm like, what does this have to do with anything we just celebrated? Not like if they'd come out and done Let It Go when 4 cast members from Frozen just got Disney Legend Awards, I would have been like, all right, I get it. I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? So between the whole Can You Feel the Love, Whole New World mashup at the beginning and the Encanto randomness at the end, they fell flat as far as like production value for this, for me.
Yeah, the performance was not great overall. But what it seemed to me like it was almost an apology for, like, we know you had to sit through a ton of acceptance speeches, so here's something you all love. Here's Encanto. It reminded me a little bit of, like, if I've been making my friends listen to, like, 12 songs that I love, and I'm like, oh, do you guys want to play something of yours now? You know, like,
I will say, I thought overall the speeches were pretty good.
Oh, no, I thought so, but I think Disney perhaps suspects that people won't be into the Legend ceremony.
Put it in a smaller room. I just don't get it. They're so resistant to like put it in a smaller room.
See, I love that by putting it in Hall D23, it like elevates its status, which as a big Legends fan, I love.
Yeah, okay, fine. Agree to disagree. Let's move on. We're talking a lot here about a lot of different things. We're not going to get through every panel, but I just want to touch on some things. I went to a very 90s afternoon special with the all-new Mickey Mouse Club, which was phenomenal. One of my favorites of the weekend. I had a reservation for this. No glitches, like I said. This was just so much fun. If you grew up with the 90s Mickey Mouse Club, of course, the one that had Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, JC Chazet, Kerry Russell, Ryan Gosling, so many famous people. Of course, they weren't there, but their castmates were. And I got to say, these folks truly love each other. You could sense it on stage. I was actually talking to somebody who was backstage with them, and he told me, he's like, these guys love each other. Like, they clearly have an amazing chemistry. And I was like, it was so evident on stage. I loved it. And because they shot at Disney MGM Studios, there was a lot of like nostalgic Disney MGM talk. And even the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set Adventure was brought up at one point. And I was just like, this is amazing. So it was such a highlight for my day number one. Anything like that for you on day one?
Well, I'll say I did not see that panel, but I'm so glad you were there, Jeff, because it would have been an utter travesty had the one panel that mentioned the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, movie set adventure had been one where you were not in attendance. Can you imagine? So thank God.
You know, well, first of all, how do we know it wasn't mentioned in multiple other panels? It may have been. We weren't there to witness it. But the travesty of the weekend is that somebody was there at Expo cosplaying as Wayne Zielinski from Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, complete with a small theater. And I never saw him. Many people tweeted at me, oh my God, Jeff, you need to find him. This was on day one when I had my Rick Moranis shirt on. I was like, I need to find this guy. He was there all weekend, I think, or at least Friday, Saturday. Never ran into him. Travesty, I must say.
Yeah, I never saw him in person either, but I had my eye out for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And anything else from day one?
Yeah, I only ended up doing just Legends panel-wise that first day because I was so excited to be back at Expo. And for me, because I used to spend a lot of time at booths there, the show floor has always been the heart of Expo for me. I just didn't want to pull myself away from it. I was just running around like a kid in a candy store. I just didn't want to go to a panel that day.
I will say early years of Expo, I think I had like an hour total on show floor the whole weekend because with no reservation systems in place in the early days, I spent my entire days in lines or at the panel. So it has definitely gotten better. Plus, also, I think I've just kind of like given up on certain things. I'm like, I'm not going to go to Marvel Lucasfilm. Like, I just don't care enough to give up that much of my day. But yeah, the show floor was great. Let's bang through some panels real quickly. I checked out a peek behind the curtain at Walt Disney Imagineering's Illusions and Special Effects Development Lab. Meh, not my favorite. Magic in the Air, 30 Years of Muppet Christmas Carol, we talked about. There was just anything else you want to add? It was so... Oh my God, we had Jodie Benson come out and sing the song When Love Is Gone, which was originally cut from the film. We got the news that it's going to be back added into the film on Disney Plus. And that was just like a nice surprise to hear that live. And then the medley at the end with all the Muppets. And I don't know who that drag queen was, but she was a great host.
It was almost like, speaking of Jodie Benson, it was almost like this soap opera moment. And I know they didn't mean it this way, but so there was this whole conversation about the song When Love Is Gone and how it had been axed from the movie. And Paul Williams, who wrote the song, was very upset about it. And there had been like some long-standing tension between him and Brian Henson over that. And just as they're wrapping up that discussion, there's this surprise appearance out of nowhere from Jodie Benson, who's not at all connected to the movie, walks out on stage, and basically her line was like, "Oh, I know all about executives trying to take ballads out of movies," in reference, of course, to A Part of Your World, but she actually name-checked Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Both of them did. Paul Williams said Jeff Katzenberg, or actually I think Brian Henson mentioned Jeff Katzenberg wanted it removed from the film, which is why it was, and they made a deal that it would go back into future versions, just not the original theatrical run. But then they lost the footage and all this stuff. And yeah, I've heard the same story. Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted Part of Your World cut from the film. So I actually thought it when she came out, before she even said it, I was like, how funny, because the same thing happened to her almost.
Yeah, it was, if I can say this, like kind of badass. It was giving me Emma Roberts in American Horror Story, You Thought You'd Seen the Last of Me energy. Like when she came out, it just had this like dramatic oomph to it. It was awesome. And then her performance was killer.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I loved that. I'm happy it's going back to the film.
I just want to say, this is, I'm harping on the Jodie Benson thing, but this is a big part of why I love D23 Expo, is that these completely bonkers things happen, and I mean gloriously bonkers, with regularity at D23 Expo. Just like what a drag queen just introduced Jodie Benson to sing a deleted Muppet song while throwing shade at Jeffrey Katzenberg in a surprise appearance. Like what? My brain is exploding and my heart is soaring. Like it was fantastic.
And you say you don't like drama. I did ask my friend Victor, I said, if you could have anybody, obviously Jodie Benson is very random to come and sing a Muppet song. If you could have anybody do it, who's like, would be at a D23 Expo, who would you choose? My friend said Anika Noni Rose, which I thought was a really interesting choice. Anybody that pops in your mind that is like, you know, a Disney person that would be there that you'd like to hear sing that song?
Well, the two names that we've already mentioned are at the top of my mind, which is Jennifer Lewis or Bette Midler, both of whom would sound amazing singing that song.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. Let's move on from there because there was Disney's Epic Entertainment Showcase, the musical, The Extravaganza. I will say they didn't lie. It was an extravaganza full of a lot of production numbers, and it was pretty cool. Opens with the Electric Mayhem and High School Musical, the musical, the series. Your girl, Raven Simone, was the host. She was fantastic as a host, along with who?
I was not familiar with the other person, and her name escapes my mind.
I don't remember who it was either. They were both great. Whoever they were, both fantastic hosts. This was kind of like the leftover bits of the Disney television group. So the most exciting thing to mention there was the Santa Clauses for me. It was a lot of Disney Plus, a lot of Disney Junior, a lot of Disney Channel. So we got like a Zombies 3 and not the most exciting panel, a very, half full room maybe?
Yeah, I'd say 3/4. But yeah, I was in attendance for this. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Love to see Raven not only there, but just shining. And I had seen her previously at a smaller celebration for Raven's Home out on the show floor. And she had just this wonderful moment where she pointed out that she was the first Black woman to lead a Disney Channel series. I'm proud to say I did a little recording of that, and she retweeted it, which made my day. But Raven was fantastic on stage. I do think this panel suffered in a few respects. First, they reorganized things this year. It used to be that, or at the last expo, the Disney Plus panel included Disney Plus programming from Lucasfilm and Marvel. When you take that out, those two brands are represent such a substantial chunk of the Disney Plus programming today that you're really taking a lot of the oomph out of Disney Plus. So then, as you say, it does become kind of the leftover panel. You do have some exciting things. They
even took Hocus Pocus 2 out of this. They put that in the live action thing, I guess because it's not a series, it's a movie. Yes, the movie television panels are becoming, like the Walt Disney Company is these days oftentimes, muddled. It's very confusing as to what's what. The titles of these panels don't really help. And also just random stuff going back to like the Legends ceremony. Bob Chapek teases, by the way, when you go to the parks panel, we have some stuff to talk to you about with Avengers Campus. I'm like, what are you doing? It even goes back to Iger announcing Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at a features panel or a Lucasfilm panel or something. It's like, why are you not doing this at the parks panel? Like, it's muddled.
Yeah, I didn't get what Iger was doing back then. I will say, Chapek giving that little tease at the Legends ceremony about what was to come with the Avengers campus expansion announcement didn't bother me because it struck me as sort of like old-fashioned showmanship. It's stay tuned to the end, and here's why. It's just like a little tease to get you to come back for the big programming later in the week. So I was okay with that.
Disagree, but that's okay. Still love you.
That's fine. But we did get a number of, big celebrities, some exciting announcements out on the stage. So it's still a fun program. I did hear from a lot of people that they weren't sure what this panel was supposed to be about. And once they realized, they got up and left, particularly around the halfway mark, because that's when we switched from Disney Plus to Disney Channel / Disney Junior. Now, going in as someone who did know what this program was going to be about, I knew that we would get some Disney Junior, some Disney Channel, but I figured it might be like 10, 15 minutes of the 90-minute block, but it was about half of it, and that is too much given the audience of D23 Expo. And this ties into a discussion, Jeff, that you and I were having offline earlier, and this may be interesting for folks at home who haven't been to an expo to know. There are very few children or teenagers for that matter, at D23 Expo. It is primarily an audience of adults, millennials all the way up through retirees. And so I don't know if Disney always understands their audience or who is actually coming to these things, but the idea that a room full of adults who are here as Disney fans want to hear 90 minutes of updates and performances about and from Disney Junior, I just think there was a real disconnect there.
Yeah, my guess is they probably learned their lesson here. That would be my guess. I'd be surprised if we see that return. And that is one of the things, like we keep saying, like these panels are changing year after year after year. I mean, there used to be a panel that was just Walt Disney Animation, and that was it. And like now we've seen, we'll bring in Pixar with that, or some years they've mixed it with live action. So like they try different things every year. It's just, it's not easy. That Disney owns too much is what it really comes down to. And it's not easy to put these together. But yeah, it was a weird panel. We don't really have time to get through every panel. I definitely want to talk about the Disney Parks one. But before we do, are there any smaller panels that you did that we haven't talked about that you want to mention?
The only other one I would mention was an exhibit from the UCLA archives, which was hosted by Jessie Malton, daughter of Leonard Malton. And what was cool about this is we got to see rarely seen or never before seen film footage from first the history of Hollywood, like 1920s Hollywood, to see what was going on and what Hollywood looked like when Walt would have arrived. Secondly, the early days of the Disney studios. So we got to see archival footage from the Hyperion studio, from the assembly of the first ever Mickey Mouse Macy's hot air balloon for the parade. So that was very cool. And then finally, footage of construction from Disneyland in May of 1955, so prior to opening. What's cool about this is this was footage that had been shot for newsreels that used to air in movie theaters back in the day, but in many cases never included in those newsreels. So the whole idea of like a deleted scene from a newsreel from 50 to 100 years ago in the context of Disney, I thought was just a very creative, unexpected topic for a program, and it was quite enjoyable.
Very cool. Excellent. Let's talk about a boundless future, Disney parks experiences and products. Because, going into this, the general consensus was the Walt Disney Company doesn't have much to announce. And partially that is very true. It was a lot of, hey, remember we told you about this? Now we have a date or a season or a year to announce. And that was a lot of it. But there were some pretty big surprises. One of them early on was the mention of Pacific Wharf over at Disney California Adventure going away to become San Francisco from Big Hero 6. I had never heard this as a rumor. Had you?
No, this completely blindsided me and excited me. And to that, and I'll say that coming out of this presentation, I guess it was three things to me. It was exciting, it was confusing, and it was in many ways conspicuously silent on a number of things. I guess we can walk through that.
There was a lot of Josh D'Amaro being like, isn't that exciting? That's exciting, folks, like trying to convince us. Or I felt like he was saying stuff like that a lot. Did you feel that way?
Yes, and particularly with meet and greets. I don't recall that character meet and greets have ever been focal in a parks panel presentation before.
It has not. So there's two reasons for it. One of it is they don't have much to announce.
Correct.
But to be fair, character meet and greets are one of the biggest things at Disney parks. So I do think it deserves its place, but preferably alongside some more exciting news.
Sure. It definitely had the air of we're going to pump this up into something really exciting because we don't have a lot of meat to give you.
Yeah, we did learn that Harmonious is going to be a very short-lived show because for Walt Disney World's 100th anniversary, we're getting a brand new nighttime spectacular at Epcot, which, good to me. I mean, listen, it's going to be an IP-heavy show, but...
Probably. I mean, I'll say kudos to Disney here because I think they've clearly heard, received, and validated the fan feedback. And I know Harmonious has a lot of fans, and I love everyone and respect that opinion, but I think in general, it just hasn't connected with the fan base. And it's surprising to me, but pleasantly so, that Disney is taking such early action to correct course.
One thing I always love is when we get more Walt in the parks. Delighted to see that Hong Kong Disneyland is getting a new Walt Disney statue with Walt on a bench with Mickey Mouse. Do they not have a partners statue?
Gosh, I have been there and I can't recall off the top of my head.
Whatever. This is going to be behind the castle, I believe they said. This is delightful and amazing and out of left field. And yeah, very excited to see that was a thing. Kind of smaller news, but one that excited me. The big bomb, no kind of pun intended, but essentially Dinoland USA is getting bombed or hit by a meteor because they announced that that's going to become a whole Zootopia area, at which point I was like, oh, Joe Rohde is rolling over right now.
Did they announce it though? I mean, that
one felt like more of the. There are things that they were definitely like maybe sort of might happen. This one felt like it was before that.
Okay, I see. I don't know. Maybe to me, this struck me as part of the maybe it'll happen. And what we're getting at here, for those who weren't tuned into this presentation, is there came a point about 2/3 of the way through the panel where D'Amaro basically said something to the effect of, hey, can I level with you guys? I want to share some things with you that are not yet full-fledged ideas. They're very much blue sky projects. We're still kind of deciding whether we want to do them. They're just things we're excited about maybe exploring, and we're going to share them with you. Is that okay? And he's even made a comment, this might make you all nervous, which had the effect of making everyone very nervous.
Yes. And when he said Dinoland USA is essentially gone, I'm bummed. I like Dinosaur. I know a lot of people have issues with it. I love Dinosaur.
Yeah, well, my tweet was, and so which of the Zootopia attractions will be starring Felicia Rashad?
Oh, yeah, you better be hoping for that, I'm sure.
That's what I need to know. But there was concept art here that showed a blend, basically, of Zootopia and Moana as a singular land, question mark.
Listen, I know Joe Rohde doesn't like the idea of animals with wardrobe on and Disney's Animal Kingdom, but I get the argument for both sides. How does Moana play into Disney's Animal Kingdom and because sea creatures, like...
Yeah, like everything in this back third of the presentation, that was very unclear to me.
It's like, if that's the thinking, it's like, well, there are animals in like literally every Disney movie, so you can justify anything. One of the things that literally made me laugh out loud was they were talking about Pandora, the world of Avatar, and they're like, in Pandora, a land that could only live at Disney's Animal Kingdom. I'm like, weren't you guys talking about adding it to Tokyo? I'm like, clearly it can live wherever the heck you want to put it, but... In any case, so that was interesting. Now some stuff that was really interesting was this expansion at Magic Kingdom that would include, this is like a beyond Big Thunder Mountain. sort of thing. And it would include Coco, Encanto, and a whole villains area, which honestly is like a fanboy. I feel like for decades, in fact, he basically said this. Fans have been saying, we want a villains land or park.
So first, I want to give a shout out to a website, Blog Mickey, one of the really good Disney fan blogs out there. They had predicted heading into Expo that one of the announcements we would get is a new Frontierland, basically a major expansion of Frontierland. They cited backstage work that has been going on for some time to clear the way for possible construction back behind Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. So it's a real testament to the eagle eye journalism that's going on at that site that they got this so right. Now, what we don't know, or what wasn't clear from D'Amaro's sort of confusing presentation of this, is whether this would indeed be an expansion of Frontierland or whether this will be a new land or lands beyond Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. But basically, whatever it is, it'll consist of 3 new things. One is, as you said, a villain's land. One is an Encanto land and or maybe just the Encanto house. Again, that wasn't clear to me. And then Coco, and the name of the city escapes me that this would be themed to, but essentially it's a celebration of Dia de los Muertos in the setting of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it was all very exciting, but it was very much like, we're not making any promises, but, and we know how these things go, right? Like, this has happened many times. I equate this to 2 things. Once again, they had nothing to announce that was concrete, so they had to announce something. But also, I do think the Walt Disney Company very much feels like we need to get ahead of these rumors getting out. Because, like you said, there are eagle eyes on all of this stuff, and stuff leaks. And there are a lot of dishonest people who work at the company who are leaking this information. That's no secret. So I think they're like, well, let's get it out first before them, which is what I think was the problem with Galaxy's Edge, right? Like, I think, and even the Tiana ride, like that was announced way before they wanted it to, but they had to do something, so they did it.
Yeah, that occurred to me, and 2 other things that I thought could be happening here. One is we want to put some ideas out there and see how social media responds to them before we decide to really invest in them.
Yeah.
And then 2 is, as you said, or 3, I should say, is we don't have a lot to share with you, but we want to get you excited. So we're going to give you something big, but don't get mad at us when it doesn't happen because we told you it might not happen.
Yeah.
But we did get concept art for this as well. It looks gorgeous from what we can see. I do have some concerns, which I've talked about a lot in the past, about these single IP lands in Magic Kingdom. It kind of changes the whole premise of Magic Kingdom and or Disneyland, but that's a separate discussion for another time. But as to the villain's land, that's very exciting because, as you mentioned, that is something that, like, since the beginning of the internet, certainly, if not the beginning of the fandom, this is something folks have clamored for, right? A villain's land or a villain's theme park. So a lot of potential there.
Yeah, so it'll be exciting to see what happens. We also were told that a lot of the 100-year anniversary celebration for the Walt Disney Company will be happening at Disneyland, which, of course, being a Southern California person, that's exciting for me. We're getting a new nighttime fireworks show as well as a new World of Color. So all pretty cool. I mean, yeah, there was exciting stuff. The way it was delivered was really weird and confusing and, really just like maybe sort of stuff for a lot of it. So
yeah, there were exciting things. Hatbox Ghost coming to Magic Kingdom is very exciting. The fact that Happily Ever After is returning in some shape or form to Magic Kingdom. Though D'Amaro's announcement there again was a little confusing. He said Happily Ever After will return as the anthem for either a new or reworked nighttime show at Magic Kingdom. But that gets us to some of the things that weren't announced here or even addressed here that were expected to be.
Tomorrowland at Disneyland, which needs a major rehaul, which everybody was expecting, and we got nothing.
That's right. And at Magic Kingdom, where a lot of minor upgrades have been in the works for years now, and everyone thought perhaps that was leading to something that would be announced here. So we didn't hear anything on that. We didn't hear anything on a nighttime parade for Magic Kingdom, which folks thought would be coming. We didn't hear any updates on the stalled projects at Epcot, meaning the Pixar Play Pavilion, which we know there's some movement on that, but no comment was given here.
Mary Poppins.
The Mary Poppins attraction, exactly.
Spaceship Earth.
Yeah, Spaceship Earth.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of these things that I think, Fantasmic at Walt Disney World.
I thought we were going to get an announcement for the new dragon for Fantasmic. I would have bet money on that, but that didn't happen. So Yeah, it was an interesting parks panel for sure. Let's talk about, we've talked about kind of the big panels that we went to and stuff. Let's just talk about the show floor real quickly. As I mentioned, the wait times, actually, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the wait times seemed so much better for things like the parks pavilion and the show floor and the archives. Normally 30 to 45 minute waits were like 10-minute waits. So I don't know what they did. Maybe there was just more to do, but that seems to be fixed, whatever that problem was in the past.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. And so again, to kind of counter our rants earlier in the episode, overall, I think the guest experience improved here.
Yeah. I will say tons of photo ops. I know we live in the world of selfie museums now, but like so many photo ops. And most disappointingly, the archives exhibit became a selfie museum. And I was like, this place didn't need to be. This is not what this is, but it's what it became. And that was a little sad to me. Otherwise, tons of photo ops. The highlight for me with the Parks Pavilion would have been getting to see the new Dreamers Point statue that's going to be in Epcot of Walt sitting, which I guess is getting some criticism online. I think it's beautiful. I don't know what the criticism's about, but I think it's great.
Yeah, I thought it looked lovely. There was also the model of the new Tiana's Bayou Adventure. I was not clear on this, Jeff. People were asking, was that model specific to either Disneyland or Walt Disney World, or it was intended as kind of a catch-all model?
I assumed it was kind of a catch-all, but I don't know for certain.
Yeah, okay. Very hard to glean much insight about what that attraction is going to be from the model that we saw or the brief comments that were made during the parks presentation, or even the placards that were on display in that parks pavilion. I'll just say I'm all for that change and excited to see it happen. My concern is that the story doesn't promise any real sense of conflict in the narrative. And, this is a mistake we saw them make with Frozen Ever After, where it's just kind of a celebration after a story has concluded and we're just kind of singing songs with characters we love. I hope that's not the case with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which has such potential to be just an incredible attraction. Certainly going to be a beautiful attraction. That was clear from what we saw.
I was really hoping that they were going to announce that Critter Country is going away and that it was officially going to be called like New Orleans Back Bayou or something as a land.
I thought that was sort of there, but unsaid. It was almost like reading between the lines.
He said now moving over to New Orleans Square. He did say something like that in regards to Disneyland. So perhaps it was it's clearly going to be part of New Orleans Square. The question is, does any of Critter Country still exist? I would hope that they'd just be like, no, let's get rid of Winnie the Pooh. Let's do something different there.
If New Orleans Square annexes, so to speak, Splash Mountain / Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I don't see how Critter Country continues to exist as a quote unquote land. It will have to be either annexed by, Frontierland or something, or be absorbed into New Orleans Square. I think that's likely to happen. And there were some other implications of that. When the Imagineering creatives were talking to us about the development work being done on Tiana's Bayou Adventure, they were talking about how it's going to make you fall in love with New Orleans, want to visit New Orleans. So it seemed like all of the discussion was on New Orleans in this part of the park. And I just want to clarify, I'm very, very excited for this project, and I'm glad to see it happen. But I do hope that the story is mindful of the need for conflict and peril and a sense of danger for a thrill ride to be captivating.
Yeah, I don't see how it's ever going to work at Magic Kingdom. I just don't know how they're going to make that make any sense.
I will say I think that it can. I think there's a lot to be said there, but it's probably too much of a discussion for us to have, in this.
At a later date, when this attraction finally opens,
there we go.
We shall discuss. One thing I want to say about the show floor that I very much missed was the parades that used to be part of the show floor.
Yeah.
That was such like a cute magical touch, and that was nothing major. It was like one vehicle, a marching band, and some balloons, but like it was awesome and really set it apart from other conventions. Very bummed those didn't return, and I really hope they do.
Yeah, it was a small thing in the past, but I think
it was a happening.
Yeah.
It was a Disney theme park moment,
It was very impactful. It really brought everyone together in a sense of community. It was this sort of joyous, short-lived moment throughout the day. I don't know why it's not happening. My first thought was maybe some sort of a COVID precaution, but there were no other COVID precautions to speak of anywhere in this convention. So
not entirely true. So for any of the meet and greets, you needed to wear a mask.
Okay.
These parades apparently often had celebrity guests in them.
Correct.
So maybe they felt like, oh, they need to be masked and that would be weird. I don't know. So it may have been COVID related and may have been budget related. Who knows? But they weren't there. I miss them, so I hope they come back in the future. I will say that. But, we could go on for hours about Expo, but overall that was kind of the highlights for us and kind of, theories and thoughts on what's going on with D23 Expo. Hopefully it'll be back in 2 years. As we learned, there's no guarantee at this point. It was 3 years since the last one for very obvious reasons, but it was really nice to be back. It was really nice to see people. I will say, having gone to every Expo, this was probably my least favorite one for several reasons. I got a little spoiled last time just having every panel I wanted at my fingertips. Didn't have that this time. Not a ton of exciting announcements. So for numerous reasons, not my favorite Expo, but still a fun weekend. And of course, so happy to see my friends there. And it was a fun time. Oh, I also want to give a couple of shout outs to Brandon and Sarah are two names that I'm remembering. I apologize to everybody else whose name I'm not remembering. But Brandon and Sarah are listeners of the show. Thank you so much for stopping and saying hello. It was, of course, always a pleasure to chat. So thank you for listening and for saying hello. And anything else you want to add, Aaron?
I heard from a lot of people that this was one of the less interesting expos in terms of the subject matter and the programming. And I felt that way too. Perhaps it's just an off year. But that having been said, there was still a lot of interest and a lot of substance, maybe just slightly less so compared to previous years. But at the end of the day, Expo can be incredibly flawed and it can be less interesting or less diverse or I should say less varied in its programming than I would like for it to be. I'm still going to love it. It is just such an exuberant experience. Just connecting with so many Disney fans, knowing that we're all there for the same reason, having 100,000 of us in the same building day after day, seeing so many familiar faces, meeting new people. That's what I'm there for. And so whatever else we might offer as constructive criticism, hopefully constructive for Expo, I just want to say I come away with nothing but just great feelings and just tremendous anticipation for the next one.
And Aaron loves the drama of it all. Aaron, before you go, do you want to plug anything? In fact, the Halloween season is coming up. There is a book that perhaps folks who love the Halloween season might enjoy, especially with a sequel coming out this year.
Yeah, you did the setup for me, Jeff. And by the way, so listeners know, Jeff was kind enough to plug my books and other things wherever he went, all throughout the expo floor this weekend. But yeah, thanks so much for that, Jeff. And yeah, so I know Hocus Pocus is on a lot of people's minds right now, so I do have a book on it. Hocus Pocus in Focus, The Thinking Fan's Guide to Disney's Halloween Classic, which you can find wherever books are sold. And you can also find me on social media at Aaron Wallace on Twitter, at Aaron H. Wallace on Instagram.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aaron. Now that we're all totally exhausted, we should probably rest. But thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, and apologies to all of your listeners for the extremely delirious nature of this recording. It has been a long weekend for all of us.
It's okay. People love it. And before we go, I'm actually going to drag in our friend Dwayne, who was here at Expo with us all the way from
Singapore.
Oh, my goodness. So he came a very long way. And because he came a long way, he did something that made a ton of sense for somebody in his situation. You bought
the preferred ticket.
The preferred pass. Which was, what, around $900?
I think $900, probably like $1,002 for me in Singapore dollars.
Oh, gosh.
It is insane, but I am flying all the way, and I thought, actually this wouldn't be the expo that I would attend, having attended the last expo, because it was just, so time-consuming getting in lines. But this ticket actually was the reason I came.
So I do, listen, it's expensive, but it's much cheaper than what used to be. It was like $2,200 in the past. So this is a different version. What did it get you? It guaranteed you priority seating.
Right. For the two main panels on each day. So that's 2 times 3. That's 6 panels in total. So you have a guaranteed seat, which basically you can walk up supposedly any time and get a seat. And because I'm a single person, there were pockets of single seats. So I practically was in the first or second row most of the panels.
Okay, how did it work out for you?
Great. Okay. Great. I saved a lot of time, but I also felt like I spent a lot of more time in panels. But, yeah, it's a choice.
Did you feel like you missed out on some smaller panels that interested you? We're raving about this Muppet Christmas Carol panel. I don't believe you were able to make it because you were in a main stage panel. Did you feel like you needed to go to all of the Hall D23 panels because you paid for them?
You're absolutely right. I did miss out on some of the small panels, and I also did feel that I had to go because I paid for them. But here's the thing, right? It's about having the option and having the choice, and not having to feel pressured into that. But, I felt pressured, at least.
And would you do it again?
If I were to come back, I think I would definitely do it again. But here's my only gripe.
That answer changed, because I asked you that a day or two ago, and you said, no, I would not.
Well, yes, a day or two ago was when I just started it, and I realized throughout this was that I was getting front or second row, and also we're just thinking about like how many people actually attend the expo every year when it happens. It's like 100,000 people, and if you're thinking about it to be in the first row, I mean that's a really special thing. Okay, well,
I'm happy to hear that you were happy with the large purchase. It would really not be great if you did it and kind of regretting that. So,
but the only thing that I do have a gripe about is the fact that this pass does not get you past security. So if you're thinking of strolling up late and you get caught in the security line at the start, you just might miss your panel.
Interesting. So you cannot do last minute. One thing that I found very bizarre, and I don't think I've even mentioned this to you, Aaron, but I had people there super early. Like when I was super early for the parks panel, there were people with your pass with a guaranteed good seat there pretty much just as early as me. And I was like, why on earth would you do this to yourself? You paid for this expensive ticket to guarantee you your spot so you don't have to come here at 5 a.m.
I mean, the only reason that I would think was probably just to be in that first row.
That's ultimate insanity right there. But God bless them, I guess. Well, cool. I'm glad you had a good experience. Before I let you go, anything you want to plug?
Oh, no, you just follow me on YouTube at Disney Dwayne and Instagram, same name. But that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dwayne.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Disney with a Z, coast to coast on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy the show, consider supporting it at no extra cost to you, in fact, you'll save, by visiting the Who's It's and What's It's website to check out all of the magically inspired apparel available to you. And don't forget to use code DCTC to save 15% off of your entire order. You can find the link in this episode's description. This episode has been executive produced by Robert Scontrino and Mackenzie Jalen Arnold. Gain rewards like Robert and Mackenzie, including access to never-before-heard episodes and live-stream Q&As by visiting the Patreon link in this episode's description. And don't forget that I'll be matching 100% of your first month subscription to the Alzheimer's Association for all new patrons joining this month, September of 2022. Basically, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. This podcast is part of the DePodcast Network. Learn more about this show, plus find more quality and entertaining podcasts at DePodcastNetwork.com. That's DEPodcastNetwork.com.